Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of VENDO Velocity. It's a special time in the Amazon world. No better person to come on VENDO Velocity with me today than the man himself, who's in the weeds of the data every single day and is monitoring performance along with our account strategy team, Russell. And Russell, if you don't mind, I know you've been on VENDO Velocity and just the VENDO podcast for years now, but give a quick intro for those of you who aren't familiar with you yet.
Yeah, for sure. Russell, essentially, I kind of run the data department here at Vendo. So, when it comes to a big event like Prime, for example, it's kind of all hands on deck, right? We're monitoring data. Obviously, there's a lot of data gathering after the fact, but even during the event, right, these are times where, there's a lot of communications happening across the board among our different teammates. So, it's kind of that thing where anything I can see, right, even if it's not really hard data, this is where we're just kind of calling out everything that we can see, and working with Delaney and a lot of our other teammates, we're just coming up with findings, making adjustments on the fly. So exciting time for us, biggest week of the year.
Absolutely, and a big week indeed. We're seeing some really great numbers right off the bat, and we're going to dive into those in a second here. First and foremost, I want to just get your take, Russell, on the lead up to the event, and what can sellers, or what did sellers see in that lead up this year compared to maybe their normal baseline?
Yeah, interestingly enough, so the lead up every year is kind of different, right? And especially for this year, the 2 weeks prior to Prime, we usually see a bit of a sales drop at the end of each month, right? People waiting for their paychecks, that type of thing. So there was definitely a drop in sales, I would say around, week 25 or week 26. But then we saw actually a really strong bounce back for most of our brands as far as sales leading into the week of Prime. So, really nice performance there. So that's not the case for a lot of years where, the week prior to Prime, especially once Amazon kind of announces the event, sales kind of drop off. So it's nothing that's, too major as far as, what does that inform us on, but it's just an interesting trend that kind of happened there. And then obviously, leading into Prime, we, are seeing sales really spike and things of that nature. But, it is something that, year over year. So that's not so, if you see sales drop off right prior to Prime, it's not a big concern. But also if you see sales spike, you kind of want to look across the board and see if you can gather information from other sources, see what other brands might be doing. But it's just one of those things that, could vary up each year depending on what happens. And one thing that we used to often do is run lead-in campaigns with whether it's coupons, increased advertising, things like that leading into the event. And, that usually helped us kind of mitigate those. But this year it was kind of just one of those things that kind of happened organically across the marketplace, I would say.
Absolutely. And on top of what Russell's saying there, just in terms of how we're monitoring, one of or two of the biggest KPIs to look at is one, your category ranking, and two, your keyword ranking on some of your top search terms. If you're seeing that your organic keyword ranking is declining on a lot of those keywords that you want to win on page one on, whether it's during Prime or outside of Prime, then that probably means that the competition has already started to increase their bids to adjust for the increase in traffic that's coming during Prime. So really monitoring that closely to understand, okay, does it make sense for us to be a little bit more competitive? And as Russell said, spend a little bit more during this time frame just so we continue with the current ranking momentum that we have, or does it make sense for us to stay consistent depending on how those trends are looking? So transitioning a little bit into the main event here, yesterday was day one. And as we all know, Prime Day deals go live at 12 a.m. Pacific time. So they went live at 12 a.m. Pacific time yesterday on July 16th. And right off the bat, really in the morning, as we start to see the East Coast wake up and start their day, that's where we'll see our first wave come in. So, Russell, I want to get your thoughts on just overall. Of course, it's our expectation that that's going to be the trend, but how have these expectations kind of compared to maybe previous year?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, things kind of fell exactly as we predicted. Like because we've run so many primes here at Vendo, we have a pretty good sense of the type of sales lifts that we get on a per day basis, but also when the traffic really comes in, right? Generally between the two prime days, day one, like at the beginning of the day, right around I was like 6 to 9 a.m., there's a spike there. Right as people are getting up, starting to go to work, like they see their first deals coming in, and that's where we see the primary spike on day one. And then day two, even though it hasn't happened yet, generally like somewhere towards the end of the day, like right before all the years deals are about to expire, that's also where we tend to see spikes there. So that trend has kind of followed past years. And then as far as sales lifts are concerned, and I know we might get into deal types and things like that a little more later. But generally when it comes to like the lifts we see on a per brand basis as well as per category basis, generally usually 5 or 6x lift, something like that, usually on a per day basis compared to what your usual daily averages leading into the event. That's usually what we see, and it has sort of coincided like with that in terms of that compared to past years. So right in our wheelhouse as far as what we predicted for our brand, which is a good thing, I would say. And then when it comes to just one other thing that I was noticing across the catalog, so for our brands, generally speaking, when we run deals during prime day, we like to do the entire day, right, starting 12 a.m. And to go through the full 2 days. And one of those things I was monitoring just across categories and things like that, like you're able to run deals on a later basis, right? You can set, like, for example, running at starting your deal at 6 a.m. or 9 a.m. or noon or things like that. And generally speaking, we do see like brands that try to do that tend to fall behind compared to other brands, because other brands are already getting the deals, they're getting their sales coming in, and they overtake the brands that have their deals running on a later basis. So we definitely saw a lot of our competitors kind of drop out just because they didn't run their deals for the full period. Probably try to just save a little bit of money, a little bit of margin, but it probably kind of hurt them in the long run. So those are the things that I definitely noticed, just as I was kind of looking at different structures, different deal types across the category.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit more, because I think that is a bigger discussion around which deal type is most optimal to run between a lightning deal, a prime exclusive discount, or a top deal. And with lightning deals specifically, as we know, those run for a 12-hour period. The challenge with those is that if the lightning deal turns off and you're not running a prime exclusive discount, it really depends on what that optimal time frame is that you receive for that lightning deal, and better yet, if it is optimal. So let's say you get a lightning deal slated for you between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. Again, you cannot control these lightning deals, but it will run from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then as we saw the evening surge, if you don't have a prime exclusive discount set up right after, or better yet, if Amazon doesn't actually run it right after, because we typically see about a 2-hour delay, you're now missing out on a peak window. And as Russell said, even from the hours of 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., there's going to be some conversion there that you're also missing out on. So, Russell, speak a little bit about if we saw differences on day one in terms of different deal types and how those fared overall.
Yeah, so I would say for this event, not as much, right? In the past, where Amazon was a lot more selective with deals in terms of top deals and best deals, especially in terms of the brands that they allow to run those deals, it was a huge difference maker, right? You get featured for those deals, first of all, if you run it. And then, just because of the discount level that Amazon requires and all those different things, you used to be able to generate like 10 to 20 extra normal daily sales if you ran one of those deals. Now, ever since last fall Prime, where it was kind of a big emphasis, and then of course Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Amazon has really opened up the doors for brands to be able to run all these types of deals. And in a way, I think it has hurt these deal types, where essentially now it's kind of normalized, where between PDs, lightning deals, best deals, like all these different discount types, essentially now there's not really as much differentiation between them. So in terms of like sales lift, it's more or less in the same range. Obviously, so then obviously the biggest thing is your discount level. That kind of makes a bigger difference now. And then we'll talk about later as far as like other things that you can trigger on your own that could drive more traffic and things of that nature. Those actually make more of a difference now compared to the deal type. And then of course the last thing is there's just not as much separation between the different deal types on the actual interface, right? If you go to Amazon.com, a lot of times like you see like Prime, Prime deals, or those like basic badges that they kind of put out there. The differentiation just isn't quite there anymore between all those different discount types. So the consumer really isn't looking at it from that perspective compared to how we're looking at it.
Yeah, and I want to stick to one thing that Russell just said on the badging itself, because as I'm sure many of you shop for Prime Day, you'll filter specifically to Prime Day deals. Now, this year, Amazon got a little bit more competitive or strict around which products are eligible for deals. So previously, you needed a 3.5-star rating in order to participate with a Prime exclusive discount. This year, it was raised to 4 stars. So again, Amazon only allowing you to participate on those SKUs that are very highly rated during the event itself. And then there's always different pricing suppressions, whether that's your list price or your reference price, as Amazon will call it. That needs to be your most competitive reference price in the last 30 days, and usually at least 15% lower or so than that most recent reference price. So this is going to be the most competitive price that you're running during Prime Day. And from what we saw for those products that didn't fit that criteria and weren't eligible, typically what we'd do is we'd set up a regular Prime exclusive discount that would just run on the Prime Day 48-hour period. Now, what we saw this year is that that badge wasn't present. So usually when you run a regular Prime exclusive discount, it still has a badge. It shows either a percentage off or a deal. It's not the same Prime Day badge that really clearly stands out, and you won't be filtered in the Prime Day search results. But this year they changed it even more so to where it's just a strike-through price. Now, we know that the badging is important, so just looking at different coupon opportunities, and of course, if you're not eligible for Prime exclusive discount, it's really about how do you stand out in the search results page. And the regular Prime exclusive discounts, unfortunately, this time around aren't able to do that. So that really limited some of those brands' ability to see the same level of growth that Russell was speaking of, that 4 to 6x. And then one other thing from the vendor central standpoint is that those deals, if you're running a best deal, are actually different criteria. So you can run a best deal on Vendor Central for Prime Day at 15%, whereas the minimum badging for Seller Central is 20%. So again, just some nuances that aren't really visible to the consumer, but are important for us to note when trying to see which products are eligible. But Russell, one important thing that you touched on there was category breakdowns. And I think that a lot of feedback that we hear leading up to Prime is, hey, I'm not really a seasonal item. I'm not one of those like highly giftable items, or one that, consumers are looking for a discount on necessarily. I'm more of an evergreen item. If we look at numerator data that's been published for day one, some of the top items are the Amazon Fire TV stick, which me personally, I prefer the Roku, but okay, we'll leave it at that. Premier protein shakes, liquid IV packets, Glad trash bags, and Blink outdoor cameras. So some in electronics, some in the protein categories, some of your just household essentials type of products and health and wellness. And then when we look at categories purchased, 27% of the surveyors said that they purchased something in apparel and shoes, home, and then 25% home goods, 24% household essentials, 21% consumer electronics, and 20% health and wellness. Now, it goes down from there, but it seems that these categories align well, of course, with the top items. So, Russell, maybe give us some insight into the category breakdowns that we're seeing. Is there differentiation in just how consumers are shopping by category?
Yeah, of course. As Delaney said, there's single purchase items generally do very well. You're doing big events, but also one of the other big things is really just price point, right? Because Amazon kind of gives you the number, gives the consumer the numbers as far as the percentage off, but the consumer really a lot of times is looking at the hard dollar amount that they're actually getting back, right? If you're selling, a product that's like less than $20 MSRP, and even if you do a very big discount, at most you're giving the consumer what, $5-10 off, versus if you're doing a $50 product MSRP, you could be giving them $20 off or even more at a lower percentage off, but the actual hard number that the consumer is saving is more, right? And that's generally what we see, where consumers do tend to buy those a lot more, which is why electronics, which tends to have a higher price point, those tend to do better. So one of the other things that we do see Amazon trying to do to mitigate this point is, in the past, it was very hard to stack subscribe and save discounts on top of deals and such, during these big events, right? Essentially, you're kind of having to hit the consumer twice, right? You're having to have them buy your product on these big events, and then you're kind of having to hit them with advertising or other discounts the second time to get them to subscribe. Now it is actually something that's a lot easier, and people are just able to stack it together with most of our different discount types. So that's one of the things Amazon has noticed, and that has definitely helped a lot of our brands quite a bit in terms of just being able to kind of see that lift. But then even if we're talking about items that are evergreen or more consumables at a lower price point, we definitely see a lot of differences, right? One of the things that we're looking at was supplement brands, right? When it comes to things like, for example, fish oil, protein shakes, pre-workout, all these different things, we definitely see, like, at a product line level, that difference in the consumer's just willingness to purchase. And it's regardless of price point, there are just certain types of keywords or type of products that consumers are just a little more focused on. So even within your own catalog, depending on the category you're in, you really want to really start separating out yourself at a product line level, I would say, at a category level, and understand where is it that consumers are probably going to have a higher intent to purchase. And when we talk about these things, like with Prime, a lot of times there's not much that you can do to adjust during the event, so it's more prepping for your next event. So I would really encourage just looking at your product lines during this event, looking at the keywords that are associated with their product lines, and understand where are the consumers kind of focusing on. And then in the future, as far as your discounts, as far as your spend, your distribution there, really kind of focusing on the items that have a higher potential to drive those consumers within your catalog, within your funnel. And then obviously, you can come up with other strategies later on to push them towards your other products, but there's going to be these customer acquisition products within all of your products that are going to do better in comparison. And that's where you should really put your focus on in the future.
Absolutely. And you guys can get pretty granular with this. A few of the data points that Russell was just speaking of, you can dive in planning for the event as well. If you think of tools like brand analytics directly within Amazon's platform, it very clearly allows you to see what some of the top search terms are during a given time period. Look back at Prime Day or the lead up to Prime Day in previous years, and you can see what that growth is for those specific keywords within your category. Same thing in Helium 10. There's a Cerebro time tracker in which you could select a specific month. You can plan ahead for October when we have the Fall Prime event. You can see what is the search volume now versus what is it going to grow to in October due to some of the increases in, one, seasonality, but two, just Prime Day traffic overall, and as Russell was alluding to, intent to purchase there. So I want to talk about customer acquisition in a second, because that's, of course, very important for us to track. But before we do that, I want to jump into some of the retail comparisons, because I think one of the bigger things that we saw this time around was, in the lead up to Prime Day, price matching with Target Circle Week, with Walmart deals, etc. So Target Circle Week ran last week, and as we saw, they were showing a strike through price, and that was in Google Shopping results. It was showing the Target Circle price rather than as a discounted price. So Amazon was now benchmarking their prices against these Target Circle only prices and forcing brands to either match their buy box or to just lose their buy box during that week. So many brands chose to just lose their buy box entirely so that they wouldn't have to discount more aggressively for Prime, because those discounts were already aggressive. But Russell, I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen overall in just with some of these other summer sales and competitive sales. Like 35% of consumers in this numerator study said that they also shop Target Circle Week and Walmart deals. How are those other sales having an impact on Amazon Prime Day overall?
Well, look, When it comes to these events, these platform specific events, it's all about market share, right? For these platforms themselves. So, that's the big thing. But, for our brands, obviously Vendo managing these brands on Amazon, of course, we'd like a lot of those sales to come through Amazon. But really, for your brands, you want to look at it as a whole, right? And so, especially with the timing of these events, it's not a coincidence that they're timed so closely. So it kind of goes back to taking that step back and understanding as far as like full size of pie, how are you doing, right? Especially, if you compare to previous years where either you didn't participate in these events or, certain platforms maybe didn't run these events as heavily, obviously your numbers are going to be more Amazon, heavy, because Amazon kind of runs this event every single year. But now that you're kind of seeing that bigger distribution, you're seeing the consumer being a little more aware of what's out there and doing that research themselves, knowing, when these events are going to be coming up. Now you're kind of really diving into just understanding on each of these platforms, obviously combine your top gross sales, but then understanding margin wise, how are you doing for each? Where should you put your focus on? And whether it makes more sense for you to just kind of disregard one or two of these platforms and then focus heavily on the other one, or if you're kind of spread out, what does that look like for you? What does your total profitability looks like? At the end of the day, it kind of does go back to that margin analysis. And then obviously from a long-term perspective, Amazon is a lot better for, let's say, consumable brands when it comes to subscriptions and that long-term value. So that's one of those other things where if you're able to understand your long-term value between platforms, that's one thing to really want to take into account. Walmart only recently started launching a subscription model, and the discounts and things like that aren't as robust right now, but that is something that will probably be developed further in the future as well. So those are things that you kind of want to consider and understand, probably now that you kind of have this event under a belt in the future, how you kind of want to plan things out when it comes to multi-platform kind of discounts.
That's a great point. And let's talk a little bit about customer acquisition, since you started to dive into LTV a little bit. But with customer acquisition, from what we've seen in previous Prime days, CAC actually improves during Prime Day itself. And even just looking at yesterday, because of the strong uptick in our organic sales, tacos also improves as well. And overall efficiency is usually pretty strong during Prime Day itself. So we're seeing that through day one this year. We've seen it historically. Russell, why is it important that we're looking at customer acquisition as a primary KPI? And what would you say to brands as far as the need to benchmark customer acquisition, not just during the event, but coming out of it?
Yeah, of course, because one of the big questions we always get asked by our brands is, for these customers that buy our products for the first time during Prime, right? Do those customers actually come back to us? And the answer is a resounding yes. Generally speaking, when we've tracked these performances over time, it doesn't really matter how you drive your consumer into your funnel. On a long-term basis over time, essentially their behavior usually is exactly the same. So at the end of the day, it's about, for that first purchase, what is your customer acquisition cost, right? That's really the big question that you want to ask yourself. And yeah, like Delaney said, generally speaking, CAC tends to go down just because the higher intent to purchase, higher number of traffic that you get during these big events. So that's one thing. And then obviously the other one is, when it comes to customer acquisition, ranking and visibility is that big thing that really helps you, right? If your ranking is low, then you're really ad reliant. Your CAC will be higher, versus if you have a higher ranking, your CAC will generally be lower, or at least very competitive compared to your competitors. And so, with these big events like Prime, a lot of times, it really isn't about the sales or the profitability for these events. It's about your positioning and making sure you have a really strong positioning leading out from Prime. So if you get an improvement in your ranking, then you're going to have better customer acquisition costs leading out from the event, right? The months after the event, you're going to be in a better position compared to competitors. And, that kind of just goes back to, now you're able to have that evergreen, that flywheel effect of your brand just being in a better position to acquire more and more customers over time. And really, that's really what you want to do, which is build up your customer base. And that's how you achieve profitability, right? Generally at the beginning, like, most of your customers are always going to be new to brand. And then once you kind of build up that customer base, now you're able to focus on both profitability and customer acquisition over a long-term period. So Prime is essentially just one of those big tools for us to kind of really drive a lot of consumers, but also the point of it is always from a long-term perspective, how does that impact us, right? Because at the end of the day, it's only a 2-day event. There's only a limited number of sales that you can drive, if it's super high compared to, all of your other days. So, ranking, as always, is our biggest focus here at Vendo, and that's what Prime kind of does for us.
No, those are all great points. And I think another thing, we can't talk about lead out too much just given the time we have on this podcast. But as Russell said, subscribe and save, and really being able to grow your subscribe and save base is really important, especially for consumable products. So whether that's a subscribe and save coupon, whether that's running DSP and retargeting these customers who have just interacted with your brand maybe for the very first time, there's a ton of different strategies that you need to make sure you're focusing on in the lead out, because Prime Day isn't just about the actual 2-day event. It's very much about how you're solidifying that ranking coming out of it as well. And as Russell said, increasing your new to brand customer base and also retention overall. So I want to segue to a little bit on the external traffic piece, because I think we've had more brands that have started to increase their comfortability to test external traffic, at least on the days of Prime Day. And one of the larger concerns about running external, at least that we've faced in the past, and it still very much exists today, is, hey, well, we're just driving these people away from D2C where maybe our CAC is stronger there. Russell, let's talk a little bit about, one, what external traffic levers are most effective from what we've seen, and what would you say to that argument as far as D2C cannibalization?
Yeah, for sure. So starting with the external traffic, look, when it comes to external traffic, it's kind of across the board, right? All these different things that you can do to drive external, right? Whether it's, TV ads, for example, and, you can kind of do that through DSP as well, but just TV ads in general. And then, of course, social media. Social media is kind of the big one because, with these short-term events, that's kind of the one that has the most direct effect when it comes to driving a lot of traffic in a short amount of time. So, we have a lot of brands that, have started working with, influencers. We also have brands that have worked with influencers for a long time, and they put a lot of money into influencers. And it's actually, generally speaking, a lot more cost effective to utilize those channels, even compared to on Amazon advertising at scale. Right, just because the way Amazon kind of values external traffic, that is still in effect when it comes to Prime. So all that traffic that are kind of driving to your listings, to your search, those things are also going to really help boost you in terms of your just organic ranking and things like that. So that's a big one as far as just being able to really set yourself apart. And when we talk about these brands that do a lot of external traffic, those are now the biggest levers when it comes to seeing huge lifts in terms of your sales on Prime Day compared to regular days, right? Those are the brands where you can see a 20x to 50x lift, even depending on what brand you do and what type of influencers that you have or whatever type of traffic that you have. And then the other really important piece, kind of leading into your second question, is cannibalization. So you do want to make sure that when you're doing external, that you're sort of making sure that you're at least trying to push for consumers who have not purchased, right? Consumers are probably loosely aware of your brand but have not converted, and then getting them to convert on Amazon, right? Because generally speaking, customers do tend to convert lower lower on D2C anyway compared to these sales platforms. There's just a higher amount of trust when it comes to purchasing on Amazon, like the return process and all those things, delivery times, things of that nature that just really help kind of convert the customer. So that Amazon is going to be better anyway in terms of converting customers that have not bought. And then the other piece is, yes, occasionally you will see customers maybe move away from your D2C into Amazon, but it actually tends to be a very low number based off of what we've seen from our consumers. And then the most important thing is, like we talked about before with the different platforms, your D2C is also a platform for you, right? So at the end of the day, it's size of pie, right? As long as your combined sales, your combined revenue on both platforms is larger than they were before, then, in many ways, it doesn't really matter whether they buy on D2C versus Amazon. Obviously, profitability is something that you want to take into account when you're doing that evaluation. consideration. But generally speaking, especially as your brand kind of grows larger and larger, and as you start really looking at things like market share, you kind of do want to make sure that your pie is as large as possible, even if it's, sacrificing some profitability on the individual customer basis.
No, that's perfect. I totally agree with what Russell said, and especially on his first point there related to whether that's email, whether that's social media, whether whatever type of advertising you're running externally, really important as well that you have attribution links set up ahead of time, because a lot of brands forget that you can get that brand referral bonus and get a 10% kickback on your sales there. So again, just different levers that you can pull, but all comes down to you being prepared and just understanding how that traffic is going to have a halo impact on Amazon, and how, as Russell said, there isn't going to be as much D2C cannibalization as you might think there. We are running short on time, and we do have to, of course, get back to maximizing sales during day 2 here, as we're in the thick of it. But Russell, I wanted to get your quick thoughts on day 2 so far. I know that traffic is much lower. We're seeing between like a 35 to 45% drop off compared to day 1 so far. But what do you think we can expect for the rest of the day? What are your predictions here?
Well, look, we kind of expected this, right? Beginning of day 2 is always going to be somewhat lower in terms of customer intent to purchase. But, the biggest spike generally on the 2-day event is at the end of the day on day 2. So we expect that to be coming in. And Amazon knows this. So you're probably going to start seeing those notifications come through on your phone or whatever, platforms that you're on. Just because Amazon's going to tell you, hey, the event's going to, kind of coming to an end. You have these products in your cart or something like that, make sure you convert. So, Amazon's going to push for it. We're going to push for it. So we do expect some really nice sales to come in on day 2. Usually day 2, as far as combined sales, is still going to be a little bit lower than day 1, but it's going to be comparable and still going to be really good sales for us. So really excited for the next few hours as we see those numbers come up.
There we go. As we like to say at Vendo, let's sell more. Thanks, Russell, for joining us today. We'll see everybody next week on Vendo Velocity, but hope you have a great Prime Day. Bye, everyone.